Hi, good evening, everyone. I am McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. As always, we have a busy event schedule, especially with our virtual events. And so if you're interested in what we have coming up, make sure to check out murderbooks.com. We have all of our upcoming events on there and the event calendar. Plus, on Facebook, we have our virtual event listing. We are starting to return to some in-store events, I believe the first week of September. So that's something to look forward to. We'll have some authors in store, but for now, we're going to continue doing these virtual events and introducing customers far and wide to new authors. Tonight, we'll be speaking with Richard Lange and Ben Winters. But before I get to that, I will mention that next week we'll have around 20 authors the first week of August. We have a couple pretty cool events coming up. We have on Tuesday night, Pub Day, we have Megan Abbott in conversation with Gillian Flynn. So that's one not to be missed. And then we have a special event. We have other authors throughout the week too, but we have a special event on Thursday night. Our Penguin Random House sales reps are going to be on here discussing their favorite books for the fall. So it's essentially just a whole panel of upcoming reads and recommendations. And we always have a blast with them. They are pretty entertaining. So those two events are ones to definitely bookmark for next week. Okay, so now for the stars of the show tonight, let's bring on Richard Lange, whose new book is Rovers. Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. So I've just put a link in the comments to more where you can find more information about both authors and their books. And we have signed book plates for Rovers. So if you're interested, you can order in that link. And as always, I failed to mention a second ago, if you have questions, don't be shy. Put those in the live chat on YouTube or in the comments on Facebook. Now, Richard, I'm going to do your formal introduction here for just a second, okay?
Great.
Richard Lange is the author of the story collections Dead Boys and Sweet Nothing and the novels The Wicked World, Angel Baby, and The Smack. He is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, the International Association of Crime Writers Hammett Prize, a Crime Writers Association Dagger Award, and the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He lives in LA, and as I mentioned, his brand new book is Rovers, and we highly, highly recommend it, and think you should definitely check it out. We also have joining us tonight, Ben Winters. Hi. Hi. That's okay. I always joke, for those of you who watch our virtual events quite a bit, you know my favorite person every evening is our guest moderator because they make my life easy. I just get to introduce and then sit back and enjoy the talk. Ben's most recent book is The Quiet Boy, and some of you may have seen the event we did with him and Jonathan Ames a few weeks ago, maybe last month. Time's a blur at this point. So Ben's formal introduction coming up. Ben Winters is the New York Times bestselling author of Underground Airlines and The Last Policeman trilogy. The second novel in the trilogy, Countdown City, was an NPR Best Book of 2013 and the winner of the Philip K. Dick Award. The Last Policeman was the recipient of the 2012 Edgar Award and was also named one of the best books of 2012 by Amazon.com and Slate. Ben also lives with his family in LA. And as I mentioned, Quiet Boy, most recent book. So I'm going to go away. You guys have a great talk. Call me back on when you're ready to get to the audience questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, McKenna. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me back.
My pleasure.
And back in the old days when people could travel the world, I had a wonderful visit in Murder by the Book, like a million years ago, it feels like. Anyway, Richard, how you doing?
Yes, I'm great. Thanks.
Good. I apologize if every once in a while I dip slightly out of frame. It's because my dog is lying here and he seems to be asleep now. So if I just touch him every once in a while, it may keep him from ruining this lovely time. My joke is that I wrote this book called The Quiet Boy, and then I spent my whole Zoom tour saying, "Quiet boy, quiet," because he said, we're not going to talk about The Quiet Boy. We're going to talk about your excellent new novel, Rovers. And I want to start by just allowing you to give because I could describe it, but it's a really special kind of book. So I want to let you describe it. Like when people are like, "What's your new book about?" What do you tell them?
Well, the elevator pitch for it was Of Mice and Men with Vampires. That's how I started out. The original idea I had was that And I started as a screenplay 15 years ago, right after I got my first book deal. I thought, Hollywood was going to come calling, and they did. And I gave them this screenplay that I'd written, this vampire thing about these two brothers, and my agent wouldn't even pass it on. She just said, this is too weird and not good. So I had it kind of in my back pocket for all these years. And when it came time to write a new novel, I'd always thought it was a really good idea. I just didn't know really how to execute it. And finally, I felt that I had the skills to do it. So it changed a lot from what it was in the screenplay. It was just basically the story of these two brothers. One of them is mentally challenged, and they are what are called rovers, which is sort of what vampires call each other. I don't know, I had an aversion to using the word vampires. I wanted to try to write the whole book without doing that, but it became impossible. Like after the third chapter, when two regular people are talking to each other about these occurrences, they have to describe them in some way. And unless we're in some other world, then they would use the word vampires. Right. So it ended up going, expanding a lot from the screenplay. And what it became is sort of this revenge thriller that plays out in the Southwest, and the characters, on a surface level, on the plot level, it's a revenge thriller that plays out in the Southwest, a chase and pursuit. Could be a Western, could be anything. In this case, I chose to make it a like vampire horror thing. I set it in 1976. It takes place around the bicentennial, leading up to the bicentennial. And it's basically about these two brothers traveling around, and a father looking for his son has been murdered, and he is on another path searching the Southwest for the killers of his son. And the final group is a group of rover vampire biker gang called the Fiends, who survive by committing petty crimes, and they'll be hit people, they'll do robberies, they just kind of get up to malfeasance. And all of these three narrative groups, the brothers and the guy searching for his son and the bikers, their narratives all converge at one point, and it becomes a revenge thriller. But I just used those genre tropes in order to write what I always write about. It's everything. There are motels in it. All my books seem to have motels. All my books seem to have people on the road. I always deal with marginal characters, and in this case, these rovers are marginal because they feed mainly on junkies and prostitutes and homeless people that nobody will miss. And that's how they're able to, they've been around forever, and they're able to exist because they take out people that nobody will miss. But that's basically the plot of the book, is that it's these two brothers meet a girl. One of the brothers meets a girl that looks exactly like a girl that he was in love with who died. Something happens to her, and they end up, the two brothers combine forces with this father, and it becomes, like I said, a revenge thriller. But that's it on one level. That's the main level, the level that most people are going to, pick it up and look at it the first time from.
What's interesting to me, and it was interesting to hear you describe that, how the vampires came into it as another way of exploring your sort of larger interest as a writer, which is in sort of marginal characters and the kind of gritty, this almost Edward Hopper, Tom Waits world of motels and pool halls and all that stuff. And I'll tell you a quick story from my career, which is that I wrote this book, The Last Policeman, which was just, for me, it was a way of writing a murder mystery in an interesting way. Because it's going to be a murder mystery, but the world's going to end in a year. Right. So there's this asteroid that's going to destroy all life on Earth. How does that, make a new context for a murder mystery?
Right.
And then I found the book being described as a science fiction novel. And I was like, and it just turns out once you put a giant asteroid in your book, it's a science fiction novel, whether you want it to be or not.
In your new one, a glowing kid. I mean, people.
Yeah, or whatever it is, right? So I'm interested that it sounds to me
Well, I'd written, my earlier books were pretty straight, were straight ahead, literary short fiction, and then straight ahead crime. And I just kind of wanted to try something different and something that would catch people. Your books all have great 2 or 3 line concepts, that catch people right off the bat.
For the most part, I try. Yeah, I guess that's the way my imagination works, and this book does. This book definitely does. It's interesting that you described it.
I'm copying the successful guys.
Well, I don't know about that. But like this book, what's really cool to me about it is that it doesn't play or doesn't read to me like a horror novel. It reads to me. And even like it reads me like a great crime story, and like the twists and turns are very satisfying, and the violence is very well rendered. But it also just feels like a very human story, ironically, because most main characters are not human. But like Jesse and Edgar, for those of you who haven't read it yet, that's the brothers at the center of it. And Jesse is this, in a way, he's a kind of classic noir story protagonist in the sense that he is world weary and he knows too much about how sad the world can be. And he has to go on because he's made this promise to take care of his brother, who, as you say, is mentally handicapped, and they're both immortal. So it's like it felt to me like it was coming from a place, all of which is to say it was coming from a place that wasn't like, oh, I'm going to write a horror novel. It felt much more like you as an author wanting to continue to explore these kinds of characters, and here's an interesting way to do that. Does that make sense?
I couldn't have sat down and written a horror novel like with an idea in mind, because same with the crime books. I never thought I was going to be a crime writer. I mean, I wrote a book of short stories, that was considered kind of literary, and in order to sell that, I had to have a novel. They wouldn't. The publishers wouldn't take a book of short stories. So I was 42 years old. I've been working. I had a day job. I was working as an editor on a magazine, and it had always been a hobby up to that point. And I never thought that I was going to have the opportunity to write a novel. So I sat down and I had to figure out how can I can write short stories pretty good, but how do I write a novel? So I needed a structure, and I hadn't read much crime. I'd read a lot of Elmore Leonard because I liked him on another level, as writers do. They love him probably more than like the crime fiction people. Other writers love him, and so I'd read that, and I'd read some Ross MacDonald, and and I knew the basics from films and stuff. The easiest plot I could do would be a guy dies in the beginning, and then you find that someone tries to find out what happened, and you find out what happened. It's the plot of a lot of things, and but I knew then that I would at least have a structure to pull me along to get me through this novel. Sort of these stops I knew I had to hit along the way, that are traditional, and it would just keep me going instead of just because my short stories aren't very plot oriented. They're much more about character and setting and mood and capturing a moment. So that was it. I chose that structure. Of course, I screwed it up by the 3rd chapter. You knew who did it, and I was then doing chapters from his POV, but at least it gave me a start, and it ended up being classified as a crime book. And then, so the next 2, I kind of stuck with the same sort of, quick, easy plot structure. The second one was a chase from beginning to end, but it had.
What was that first one?
Angel Baby. The first one is called This Wicked World. The second one was Angel Baby. And then I continued on with the third, but by this time I was put out a book of short stories in the middle there. But by this time I was kind of getting tired of that, the crime structure. So I said, well, I did crime without knowing crime that well. Maybe I could do this horror thing. I know how to tell a story. And if you know how to tell a story, you could sort of do anything, right?
Yeah. What's so interesting, like, literary careers are really, I'm like endlessly fascinated to hear different people's stories, just how they navigate this. Because at a certain point there becomes a tension where it's like your agent, your publisher, the bookstore universe has a perception at a certain point of, well, what is a Richard Lange book? What are we going to be getting here? What's the cover art like? What are the expectations? And then there's this like, oh, that's exciting. I got to do that again. But then also there's this like, almost not a resentment is the wrong word, but a little bit of a tension of like, well, I want to do what I want to do.
Right.
And like, you don't want to.
I've been saying about this book is that I worked, 25 years for bosses, 9-to-5 jobs, and I had to do what people told me to do. When I became a writer, I thought, oh, I'm free now. I can do whatever. A writer is free. He can do whatever he wants. And so, it's not like my publisher forced me to write crime books. Those were the things I was doing. I mean, I'm still learning as far as I'm concerned. I'm still learning how to write novels and what I can do and how far I can stretch it. This is Rovers as far as I've stretched my skills so far. It has 4 different narrative voices and it has epistolary stuff. It has point of view from the mentally challenged guy. Like I mix it up, but that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just write another straight ahead crime novel, and so the publishers, they want you to find something you do relatively well and keep doing it, let's see that the sales go up, and
Totally.
I keep confounding them.
Me too a little bit. I know what you said, like I tend to have a certain kind of thing where it's a crime novel with a twist,
right.
But at the same time,
there's always I didn't know, I was looking over I've read like 3 of the books and I was looking over it, and it seems like you always have sort of a detective story, but with some super interesting, background to it or an addendum.
Which in a way is because of the success or the relative success of The Last Policeman, which didn't, it wasn't a major bestseller or anything, but like that sort of put me on the map. And then I think in a similar way where it's like, well, at that point I couldn't just pitch. I didn't feel like I could just do like, well, this is just a regular crime novel. Like, It's like, well, what's going to make this a Ben Winter vampire? It's still in your tonal universe. It's aesthetic universe, whatever. But so what was I going to say? Oh, I was actually really struck in this book by the multiplicity of voices, because that's something that I find, and actually Quiet Boy, I sort of did for the first time, to really have multiple narrative voices, right? So it's
POVs in your.
And one of them is first person. If I'm remembering correctly, one of them is first person because he's writing the letter, right?
Yeah.
But the rest of them are all third person. Edgar's also in the first person, right? Edgar, the mental challenge guy. We're inside. It's very stream of consciousness. He's filtering the world with limited understanding of things. So we have that character. Then we have the dad, who is this guy whose son has been murdered, and he's on a mission to track down these rovers, and he's writing this long missive to his wife. So how did you
diary letter, something,
Very in the horror, to my limited, like it's very in the horror tradition, right? It's very
it's Dracula.
Yeah, right.
Dracula is an epistolary novel. It's all told through diaries, notebooks, transcriptions of early wire recordings. Like they have it's very modern for the time, I'm sure. But yeah, that was kind of a nod. I wanted to do a nod to that, and then of course the Edgar voice is a nod to Benji Compson. From Sound of the Fury. There's a thing narrated by one of the characters is mentally challenged in that, and his is much more fragmented and different than mine. I needed to use those chapters in order to build that character, because if you only saw Edgar, the mentally challenged guy, through the other people's eyes, he's just going to seem to be this lumbering, potentially violent, petulant. It can always petulant like a child in a man's body. By putting some of the book in his voice, I was able to build his character out and make it like a full character where you understand his frustrations and his anger at his brother. He's angry at his brother. They've been on the road for 70 years as the book begins. They've been traveling together. And, he's still angry at his brother for turning him. His brother sort of tricked him to turn him into a vampire, to take him with him, because he, as you say, he promised his mom that he would take care of him forever. And so he took that literally, and he turned his brother into a vampire. And now they've been roaming around from shitty motel to bowling alley to bar to, all these, you say Hopper-esque, Bukowski-esque places.
Yeah.
And the brother's resentful of that. And you almost sense that he's outgrowing this this control, but he still is not able to. He's not competent enough to take control of his life. So, that's a very human story, and with all this vampire stuff around, it's a very human story of two brothers, and their frustrations with each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that vampire stories, and I'm not by any stretch an expert, and I know there's this huge mythology of vampires in this, and I wondered to what extent you felt, I guess, like intimidated or hemmed in, or aside from writing the epistolary style, to what extent did you feel you were beholden to this whole universe of vampire stuff, or were you just like,
me having never read any of it? So I had no idea. I hadn't read a horror novel since Stephen King in high school. I mean, I hadn't kept up on what's what. I mean, I've seen vampire movies, so I know, the things happen. I kind of know what people expect. So I used what worked, and then, and what interested me, and then throughout what I didn't, like they don't have fangs. They kill people with knives. They're more like serial killers in that respect. They aren't frightened by crosses or religious iconography, but they do drink blood once a month. They can't go out in the daytime. They can only go out at night, and they'll live forever unless they're killed in certain ways. But yeah, someone asked me, like, my brother, he's a horror guy, and he asked me, like, did you stick to the lore? And I'm like, I don't know what the lore is, man. But and I don't feel like I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to write that kind of book. Like I said, I picked and chose the tropes that worked for me, and just left the other ones out. And hopefully, people would just, would accept that.
I think it works really well. I actually, for one, I don't think I'd ever thought about before that the fangs are kind of silly. I like that they didn't have fangs. I like that they hunted with knives. It makes a lot more sense. Just in terms of getting a lot of blood out of somebody quickly, like,
right.
Like it just something about, and also the religious stuff is interesting because the religious stuff, obviously, if they're afraid of the religious iconography, that's actually like, well, then that puts the whole thing in a very Christian, very specific cultural context. And you're essentially saying, well, I'm taking this kind of monster and I'm moving.
Are they going to run from a Torah, or
what's the, right?
Is it only the cross?
Is it just the cross, or is it like any religious iconography? Right. Totally. They can run from a Torah. I don't know. I mean, I would read that book. I feel like that's been done. Perhaps the Jewish vampire was like, no, that's fine. I'm not worried about the cross. I'm okay. So, okay, that's all great. I'm like so why 1976? That was my other big question. And maybe it's just because I'm biased because I was born that year. So I'm like, I've always been very drawn to it. I feel like it's, but
wow, you were born in 76.
I was, yeah. So I just turned 45. This just a minute ago here. But what was it about that? Like, because this, I certainly feel like the kinds of characters we're talking about and that kind of marginal lifestyle has always been a part of American culture. It is today as much as it was, the Bowery Boys. Like, why that particular song?
Particularly, the main reason and most practical is because I couldn't figure out how you would do it modern times with security cameras and DNA and all the things. I already have a hard enough time in my regular crime novels trying to get around cell phones and the things that you always have to try to figure out, like, oh, it's going dead. I noticed a dead cell phone in Quiet Boy, and I'm
I know. I'm just seeing people like tiptoeing around security cameras. It's the worst. And in movies, there's nothing worse than the scene where just you're watching somebody typing really fast and it's like you're seeing the screen.
So I didn't want to deal with that shit. So I just I said, I'm going to put it back in 76. And also, I was just thinking that, I was a little older than you were then, but, not really old. And I have a lot of nostalgia about that time. But at the same time, I had a lot of fear. That was a kind of a weird time in my childhood. I was, 12, whatever, 11. I read Helter Skelter, and like that freaked me out back then. And it kind of is, that kind of plays into the Rovers thing that there were that was like the heyday. I mean, not that are the Mansons considered serial killers or mass murderers? I'm not sure. But
I think Well, I don't know about that. I don't know who draws that line. But certainly, they
But serial killers, that was the heyday of serial killers, the 70s, the late 60s or the 70s. Like, I read some statistic there were 75 serial killers roaming the U.S. at that time. Because it was just and those are the ones we know about, because there are plenty that got away with it. That we now find out, like, wow, that guy in Central California killed like 80 people and nobody knew. Because he killed prostitutes and drug addicts and people nobody cared about. So it seemed to me that could kind of play into that era too. I like the idea of the bicentennial, that here's America, the America on the surface, having this celebration, which I usually in the book play is sort of silly. It's hats and Bob Hope dressed up like George Washington and things like that. And meanwhile, the Rovers, like it's no bicentennial. It's not 200 years for them. I mean, some of them have been for 500 years out, in the world, and this blip, of this 200 years doesn't mean much to them. So you've got this upper world where that's happening, and this lower world where it doesn't really affect them at all. So I wanted to play with that, and I don't know. I'd never done a historical novel, so it gave me an opportunity to research, which I love to research, because the more I research, the less I have to write. And I
100%.
I went down rabbit holes about one of Edgar's obsessions is children's TV hosts, which they probably didn't have them. They didn't have them when you were a kid.
Yeah. No. So like each town would have like the person who did a puppet show, or was like the sort of local Mr. Rogers or Captain.
Yeah, he would introduce like the Three Stooges or Popeye, and whatever town you're in, he would dress up sort of like, if you were in Seattle, he'd be a sea captain. And if you were in, Arizona, he'd be a cowboy. But in doing the research for that, you found out that every little small town had them, not just the big, wouldn't be a big market thing. Like, there were 10 local cowboy hosts in Arizona. So one of Edgar's obsessions is these hosts, but gave me an opportunity to research that, Old Phoenix.
It's a historical novel in more ways than that also, though, because because the characters are immortal, there are historical sections where we go back to the 1860s. I think there's a character who is he
was
French?
In the Civil War.
So, and I presume all that.
Yeah, all of that.
Also,
all of that's true. I did an interview at Poison Pen last night, which is in Arizona, in Phoenix.
Yeah,
and the guy who interviewed me he said, and you talked about there's a section where the vampires go in and they remember the first time they came to Phoenix, and they were horse and buggies, and they came on horseback, and now it's 1976, and everything that they know is getting torn down, and it's probably been torn down twice, but this specific area that they used to go to is getting torn down, and they talk about, they put the convention center over our favorite chop suey place, and blah, blah. And the guy who was interviewing me had gone and researched it and found out that it really was, because I looked it up and found he knew the name of the Chinese restaurant.
Oh, no kidding.
There was a baseball game in the book that took place. That was a pain in the ass about this book, because it took place on specific days.
Sure.
So I had them watch a baseball game, I had to go look online what ball games were they playing that they would pick up in Arizona, and so. And he said, and the Padres won that game, and I'm going, I researched it, the most messed up thing was, it's a novel set mainly at night because it's about vampires, and I was all like, oh well, I can have the moon shining down in the desert, and on those 5 days, whatever the book takes place, the moon goes from being like a sliver to none to a sliver again. So like I didn't get to write a good description of, the moonlit desert. I had to figure out other ways to describe it. So it took one of my tools out of my toolbox.
Something tells me you could have gotten away with that. I mean, I guess it's interesting. Once you know something, it's hard to pretend you don't know it. Once you find out something like that, it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I mean, I would have just said, I know someone's gonna fucking bust me on that. I know they're gonna bust me on that. You know.
I have found over my career that the people who
I was going to ask you about research, like on Quiet Boy. That, I mean, unless you're an expert in law and neuroscience, yeah. I mean, I noticed you thanked a lot of people at the back of the book, but that must have taken a lot.
I love it. It's my favorite. I think it's like my favorite. I think for two reasons, which I wonder how you feel about. One is just the procrastinatory nature of it. Like if you're researching, like you can feel like you've accomplished something when you don't have to actually write a sentence and do the hard emotional labor of actually doing the work. So I love that. That's great. And also I find that you're like, oh, I don't know X and Y about, the human brain, for example, or Phoenix in the 1970s. And you call someone and ask, and then you find out you actually don't know so many things. There's so many things you don't even know that you don't know. And like my experience is always that people just love to talk. Like they love to, if someone spent their whole lifetime developing a skill or knowledge base and you call and like, just tell me everything. Like people love it.
You know what? Nobody ever asks them. They live around their wife who says, could you please show science?
I'm like, just tell me everything. Because then they'll say something and be like, oh, that solves a plot problem, or like that gives me an idea. That's so interesting. Yeah. My favorite.
That's where research leads you. Yeah. Research leads you.
You don't know where you're going to go. And like, it's also, so I find, and also I very, very often, I don't know if you've had this, but I very often end up modeling characters just a little bit on the people. Mm-hmm. So that have given me this information. So it's like, they don't even realize it's like a life study, So
you're saying your favorite?
I know when I lived in Indiana and we were having our driveway redone, and I was writing World of Trouble, and I asked the guy, I was like, hey, let's say hypothetically I wanted to build a concrete trapdoor into my garage. How would I do that? And the guy was like, and I was like, I'm writing a book. Let me just be clear. I don't really want to have a dungeon in my garage, but if I did. So he was like, oh, well, let me tell you. It's cool.
They love. Experts love to talk to you about it, and that you don't get some. It's like me with writing. Like when my wife doesn't want to hear me talk about my, well, today I really solved this. She's like, okay, I
don't give a shit. I know. But somehow I know it's funny. It's like I find it endlessly interesting, and in fact. So tell me, what is your process? What is your day like when you're in the middle of a book? Are you like? Do you get going first thing in the morning? Are you like a midday writer?
Because I worked for so long, 9 to 5, like until I was in my mid 40s. So I really, and then when I did not have a paycheck coming every week, I was like terrified, but it was my wife who convinced me, take the chance. You got this deal. You have this money that'll last a while, just go for it. Try to do this novel, see how long you can keep it going. And I've been lucky, thanks to, Little Brown in Hollywood, that, I've been able to keep doing it full time all along. But I was terrified. So in the beginning, I was like, I'm doing 8 hours a day. I'm waking up, I've written 2 hours at night after work, for 4 days a week. That's how I turned out my short stories. I would do that at night. So I got up and started really pounding it out, and it ended up working out too, and it stayed that way. I do about two and a half in the morning, 2.5 in the afternoon, and an hour, like just kind of screwing around, editing, messing around. That's what I try to do. I let it slip more and more because I'm finding that if I really sit down and focus, I'm able to crank it out. But I don't have like a word count or anything. I mean, some days I don't get much, and some days it comes, but the idea is just to keep doing it. And I only do it, 5 days a week. I still stick to the, I'm a weekend warrior, and, I want to spend time with my wife and, and you have a family.
I do. And
I'm not one of those writers who's just, leave me alone. I'm in here 8 hours a day all the time. I wouldn't be able to write the books I write if I did that, because a lot of my books are based on like life and like talking to the driveway guy. And, I get a lot of, I get a lot of inspiration just from my day-to-day things. So I wouldn't want to just be a hermit.
Yeah.
But so I work steadily like that. I do lay down on a couch and hand write. That's how I write, with a pencil in a pad.
No shit.
So I still do that. Yeah. I haven't really gotten into I don't know. I need to be able to cross and, and move here. And it just seems like on the screen, I'm sure there are ways, but I haven't learned it, how to, you delete something and it's gone, or it's over here in a file and it's not here where I can look at both. And I work between two notebooks. I have it's a system.
No, you got your system. So you and
then I input the third pass is the input into the computer, which is like a third editing pass.
See, there are times when I think I would be a better writer if I wrote longhand, but I just think it's too late. I think and this is probably like the very slight generational difference between us. Like, I think my first writing experiences essentially were on the computer. Like my first magazine, when I was a young writer, it was always basically on a computer. And so I never really got the sort of mental habits of writing long. And my handwriting's terrible. I get impatient because I can type quicker than I can write. I'm like, I don't want to be waiting for my hands to catch up to my brain. You know what I'm saying?
I bet I came up in typing, which is the worst. It's like, if you're not a good typist, I wasn't a good typist. So you're trying to, and then you can't erase, and if you want to change something, I don't even know how people wrote novels, before computers, because
crazy.
At least the editing process, it makes everything so much easier. It seems I don't even understand. I have a great respect for those guys who were able to write novels. I kind of go back and look at their manuscripts, and it doesn't look like they're crossing out that much. And I'm like, damn,
I'm really interested, actually. And I'm sure people have written graduate theses about this, like how the actual content or the style of storytelling has changed with this technology. Like when it became possible to, for example, cut out a paragraph and move it 4 chapters later, how did that change the way that writers think about their work? And so, you know what I mean? Because Tolstoy couldn't do that.
It had to. It had to.
I'm sure you've done this where you write something, you're like, oh, I know I'm going to use that. I'm not sure where yet. I'm just going to put it aside. I don't feel like
I do have a file of great stuff I couldn't use, I'll use it someday, and I look at it and I'm like, every once in a while I get something out of it, but usually if it comes up in the moment, it really does. It's great, but it wouldn't work in what I'm doing, it seems like. But I was thinking about, a lot of people have been asking about, the influence of film, because, when they find out this was a screenplay originally, which it's completely different from the screenplay, except for the first 2 chapters, but how that has influenced, and I always think about how that has influenced writers. Everybody writes filmically now because we just grew up with it. And I just read a quote the other day from I can't remember, a writer from the 50s who was already saying that, who said, he said it had been around for 30 years by then, in the 50s. So he's like, it's changed everything about the way, because now you write with jump cuts and or like when I was doing there are a couple of huge fight scenes in the novel, I was choreographing them like they were being shot. You're filming, you're trying to make, the thing about writing fight scenes is you got to write it so there's a story within the fight. There's a progression of this thing, and I get super detailed in that stuff, and those take a long time to write.
I actually thought you handled the fighting. I get really anxious writing any sort of violence just because I feel like I always feel phony about it. I think that you handled it really well. It felt really well done. And I mean, the thing is that violence is so endemic to the world of this book because the characters are they are natural killers. That's what they are. So it's a violent universe. So there's no way you were it was going to be a violent book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's well done. I was actually curious, how you felt in terms of handling, especially Jesse, who is, to my mind, the most, although there are multiple protagonists, he's sort of the ultimate lead character of the book,
right?
To my mind, and he carries a sort of empathetic burden. And I wondered, at base, though, he is still a murderer. Essentially, he's been wandering around murdering people for all these years, and I wondered, like,
well, this is the problem, with this whole problem with this book. In my crime books, I never write about good guys. I never write about cops. I only write about criminals. Probably the Elmore Leonard influence. I mean, I'm much more. I don't really know cops. Maybe I just don't have that mindset. But
you know a lot of criminals.
I plead the fifth, but I seem to be much more comfortable on that side of things, and so all my books have been about bad people, and so one of the thing, and the short stories are not about the most likable people that you wouldn't naturally gravitate to. So the challenge for me as a writer is to make those characters. You don't have to like them, but you understand why they are the way they are. With this book, it was kind of a real challenge because almost everybody in it is a murderer, and they are, and you see them kill people, and yet you're supposed to somehow care about what happens to them throughout the course of the story. So it's a balancing act, trying to figure out how much. I didn't want to make it too sweet, where I could have made Jesse and Edgar the best of friends, and that would have been an easy, save the cat kind of thing. They're in love, but I didn't want that. So you have to. It was just like a real. How much do I have to give people to get them not to just throw away this book and go like these people, which some people are probably going to do anyway, and say that they're killers, and he's humanizing killers, but. I think there's a way to do it. I mean, this is a story I wanted to tell, and so I had to wrestle with that one. But I did what I did.
I thought the character works very well, Jesse especially, and obviously the bikers. In flashes, we like them, and they're charming in that kind of raffish way, like this sort of like classic, in the crime novel sense, like they're charming the bad guy sort of way. We're like, shit, they're tough, right. And they're sexy, and like. But like Jesse is cursed, right? And so it feels like he is like many great protagonists, going back to, Dostoevsky, right? Like Crime and Punishment, like he is weighed down by the burden of like, I don't know, the hell of his world, kind of. And so that
he made this choice. He made this choice, this promise, and he's living on it, and he's not happy anymore. The woman he loved is gone, long gone. The only woman he thinks he'll ever love. So he is in, just kind of this living hell of having to travel around with this guy. He's not having any fun, until this book briefly.
Yeah, right. He gets some love. He gets love, and it doesn't. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that nothing really works out super great in this book. But like, there's an interesting arc to his journey here, where we get to see the awakening of, I think, a somewhat long buried humanity, and that alone is like a very powerful journey. All right, should we, McKenna? Do we have any questions from our studio audience?
We do not have questions from our studio audience, but I have questions for you guys. And before we get to that, since you've done such a fabulous job interviewing and the conversation has been great, I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk about The Quiet Boy. So will you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Quiet Boy is my new novel. It is thank you. It's a legal thriller that is also a PI novel. That's also a supernatural. It's a difficult novel to describe a little bit. Basically, it's about
almost cosmic horror. I was thinking of Lovecraft.
It's a weird one. Basically, it's about it's two braided legal thrillers. One set in the present and one set 10 years ago. In the past, this kind of scumbag shitbird lawyer convinces this family to sue a hospital after their son wakes up strange after a routine surgery. And then in the present, the same lawyer is acting as the defense counsel when the father from that family is accused of murder. And in the center of it is what the hell the deal is with this boy, because he's either the first ever victim of a very unusual neurological problem, or he's essentially possessed by some sort of demon. And like that's the central question on which the novel rests. So it's a bit of a melange of crime story and supernatural story, and it's an investigation.
And a family story.
It is a family story.
It's about a family story about the relationship between the father and the son, and how that works out, and the kid and the girl. I mean, there's a lot of relationship stuff in it too.
Yeah, there's a lot of relationship, and it's my
Very
LA
human
book.
stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's yeah. So I love it. I'm very proud of it, and
Great.
Great. Thank you again.
Excellent. And you did a really good job with that because it's not an easy book to describe. So clearly you've had your practice. You know what to say about it. Nice job. We did have a question just pop up. So let me get to it really quickly. And this can go for both of you. So Susan was wondering, what comes first for you, the idea for the story or the characters that you then build the story around? And let's start with you, Richard.
I love my question.
With me, it's usually I have some sort of idea. In the past, they always came from like newspaper articles I read, like my novel Angel Baby, which is about a white guy who smuggles Latin immigrants over the border into the U.S. because they tend to pull white people over less than they pull over Latin people. It was based on an actual article I read in the LA Times about a white guy who lived in Tijuana and did that. And he did it to support a drug habit. My guy does it for different reasons, but so that I had that character in my mind and just started playing around and thinking what I could do. And so it started with a character. In this one, it's the first one I really had, as I was telling Ben, and I like an idea, like, oh, it's a mice and men with vampires. It was an idea that I could start with, but I in no way plot. None of my books I've ever plotted out. I just start writing and doing the research, and what grows out of that, becomes the book. I always say that even what happens to me in my books are like diaries to me, because I can go through and, like you had that conversation with your concrete guy, that would come into my book for that day. The conversation with, it would be a side thing that would happen, a character. So that's how I build like this day-to-day bed of life in the books, is by using this stuff. But back to the original question, yes, it's usually an idea that I've had, but then it's just the story reveals itself through the writing process. Ben?
Similarly, I think it's usually I have some sort of idea of a story or a world I want to think about, but then very quickly the next step is always to figure out who the character is, who'd be the most interesting person with whom we would want to follow through that world. And then it's sort of like the idea almost reorients itself or writes itself around the character. It's like, it's going to be so much better.
In Quiet Boy, what did you tell yourself when you were starting that? As you sat down, what did you have for that?
I knew I wanted to write a book about a family that's dealing with a kid who gets super fucked up somehow. And it took me a while to figure out the specifics of the fucked upness. And I changed it a lot while I was writing the book, but, and then the character of Jay, I don't know where he came from, but then I was like, oh, there's got to be a lawyer. And then him and his journey became the kind of organizing principle of the book. This lawyer was just like totally amoral, super happy to just make money.
Yeah, nice. But yeah, nice.
I love him. He's like actually my favorite person of all the characters I've ever written. He's like the one I most want to hang out with. Like, I adore him. But he's but he's an emotional cripple, and then he has to like find his humanity. And then it was like, oh, well, that's the book, right? That's the journey. It's like this man and through his relationship, his broken relationship with his son. So like, it's always I think like
he ends up making sacrifices that, he might not have made 10 years earlier.
And like, I think what's cool in this process that Susan asked about is like, and what you just said, it's like the book reveals itself to you as you go. You never have any idea, right? Like what the book's going to be when you're done. Like you just start.
Right.
It's terrifying.
And and here's the sad thing. It never is what I thought it was going to be. That's like you start out, you get into it and you think, oh, I've got this. I know what it's going to be. And then you get through it and you read it and you go, damn, I missed it by that much. I got to write another one. I always think it's a failed project.
Don't you find joy? I find joy in that. I find exactly, because there's always a vision in your head of like, what's this thing going to be? And then you're done. You're like, nah. But yeah. I do think there's some joy in it also, because it's at the same time, it's like you're not getting what you wanted, but then you get something else and something like that even you, the creator of it, couldn't have anticipated. And like, there's this new thing in the world. And like, That's crazy. And I don't know. So
that's what really happened with Rovers, because like I had an idea, and then like when I got to the end, I go, well, it wasn't what I kind of was doing. Damn, it's it's pretty good. I got I hit a mark here. Yeah.
And I hope everybody who's watching gets that out of this conversation. If nothing else, this novel is great, and it's super unexpected. And like I hate to talk about writing as if it's like some supernatural, like, ooh, the muse sings through you. I don't subscribe to that notion. And I think what Richard does, you sit down every day and just write, like, and that it's a craft. It's woodworking. But however, it's still magic. And like the fact that you had this idea 10 or 15 years ago, and then you wrote this book, and it's like, first of all, it's not what you thought it was going to be, but it's also no one else in the world would have written this book. Like, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
That is a cool thing about being a writer, is that, in the end, it's yours, and, you see your obsessions in it, and you like, that's the fun thing about it. And then you get to give it to other people, and they won't even get half of it. Like, they're not even, the joy I get out of it, the reader's not going to get half of it. They're going to enjoy this and that, but if I pointed to the lines I liked best in the sections, they'd be, really? But, it's just, those are the things that you.
But haven't you had the experience where someone emails you or whatever, and they're like, I loved this line or this sentence, and you're like, yes. Because there's some sentence that I've written where I'm like, that is the sentence that like encapsulates the whole idea, or that like sings to me of what this is. And when someone gets that, I'm always like, yes.
It is really great when you actually find like the few people that it really hits dead on, and you're like, well, there's like 2 or 3 people in this world who who are thinking just like me.
The thing is, and like McKenna, this as a bookstore person, like, we can't do this because it's going to make our fortune, because like it's the business is too uncertain, that there's no real formula that you can follow. You ultimately have to do it, as I feel like you did with this book. You have to do it because something is singing to you, and like it's just like it and like that's also kind of, it's romantic in this way. It's like this, well, like
this was against the advice of advisors, like, are you sure? Are you sure? And I said, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And I went away for a year and a half and turned it into them, and luckily, they went for it. So,
well, I happen to know your publishing company, and they're smart people over there. So they knew.
That's because they publish you too, right?
I know they're smart. They made 2 terrible decisions. But wait, my last question is, now that, so this started out as a screenplay a long time ago, and I wonder, since this novel has reemerged, have you heard from the Hollywood people now who are like,
well, I have the same agent that I had then, and now it's the first book I've ever had that's been optioned before publication.
Mazel tov. Okay, great.
For a TV thing.
Who picked it up? Who optioned it? Are you allowed to say who that?
It's still the contract's flying back and forth here, but it's
I'm going to email you. I'm curious.
And now you also. I just saw in Deadline today they repeated it about now it's called The Last Police.
Yeah,
but they're doing those books roughly, right?
Yeah, they're shooting a pilot. It's Fox is shooting a pilot. They're shooting in October. They're casting now. All the emails are flying around. So, yeah, It only took that novel came out in 2012. So,
right, see,
an overnight success. Yeah, no, but it's. I mean, that's again, you can't do it because it's going to make you a millionaire. You got to just write. You got to just write, and you just never know. You know what I mean?
Do your best work, and you do your best work that you can do, and don't you can't. There's no way you can think about commercial stuff. I mean, it's impossible. I mean, maybe some people do, but it wouldn't work with me at all. It would just come off as phony if you sat down and started trying to do it, and it would be stilted. It wouldn't like you say. It wouldn't sing. It wouldn't be.
And that's right. And like the people who do the really commercial stuff are really good at it. And like if I tried to write. You did. It's just you got to be yourself. You know what I mean? Like just bottom line, you got to do your thing. And you got your readers out there who like they want your thing. It's like okay, and then I'll shut up. But like one of my favorite musicians is Elvis Costello, and one of the reasons he's my favorite is because he just does what he feels like. You know what I mean? Like he
has always like, wait, you're gonna do big band stuff? Put on the, do the new wave, like.
Yeah,
you can hear
I'm gonna do Nashville. I'm gonna do a country album. Like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, I don't work with Burt Bacharach. Like, you're gonna do what? But like, the people who love him, they'll go where he goes, and the people who love you are gonna read your books. Your next one could be Set on the Moon, and I'm gonna read it because I know it isn't because I didn't read this because I love vampires. I read it because I like your work. And like that's the amazing. That's
what we want as writers. We hope for.
That's right. There you go. Thank you.
I have nothing to add to that. I mean, that was just the perfect way to end. I've been at the bookstore a really long time, and we've had, so I'm lying, I do have something to add. We've had a lot of authors come through, and a handful of them will always ask what's selling. And they're trying to tailor writing to what's selling, which is a fool's errand anyway, because by the time they write it 2 years before publication and whatever. But 2 or 3 who were bestsellers at one point, it was, bookstore legend, how much they would want to talk about what was selling, and they are no longer published. And the best advice that I always get from authors is to write what you love, because as you said, there are no guarantees. There's no guarantee that book's going to get published. There's no guarantee that at the end of the day, if you're happy with that product, you did not waste your time on it. So
that's right.
Anyway, all right. We're done for the evening. Thank you both so much. Once again, we stock both books. Information in the comments. If you'd like to order, we have signed book plates for Rovers. We have Quiet Boy in stock. We have both books in stock. And it has been a delight listening to you both talk this evening about your love for writing and everything. So I'm going to sign us off. Thanks to those watching, and everyone have a great night. Bye.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Good night.